Okay, we are going to start again, and I really apologize to everyone for these switch times. Obviously, we had a really good thing going when it's the regular time at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and when I had to move these times around so that we can finish Megillah um, before the summer starts and people's vacations start going into gear. I apologize for making it inconvenient for people, but you can watch the recording at your leisure, and so and that's how we'll follow up. All right. So all I have to do is find my glasses so I can see the computer. Here we go. All right. So we are continuing 28 on 28 A, and we're recording. Okay, very good. So we finished last time with we moved into this question of the Gemara reciting stories of people of sages who lived a long time and their students asking them, what was it? What did you do in your life that merited your long life? And so the we're now on to Rabbi Parida. And Rabbi Parida was asked, what is it that? Oh, let me call up the screen here. Okay, you should be able to see the screen now. So the on the Rabbi Parida was asked, what did you do to merit long life? And his response was, Miyamai lo kidamani adam leveta midrash velo berachti lifnei chohen velo achalti mibhema shelo hurmu matnoteha. Okay. The three things that he cites were, no person ever arrived before me to the study hall. That is, Rabbi Parida was always first one in the study hall, in the Beit HaMidrash. When he would eat a communal meal and you'd say Birkat Hamazon, if he was ever in the presence of a Kohen, he would allow the Kohen the honor of leading. And he never ate from an animal whose priestly portions, the gifts that the priest received, had not already been set aside. So let's just read the note here. The Torah specifies that the foreleg, the jaw, and the maw of an animal should be given to a priest. That was their gift. These gifts differ from the priestly tithes separated from grain and produce of the land in two ways. First, from the outset, these gifts are distinct and defined parts of the animal. So you bring an animal for a sacrifice, say in honor of something, to celebrate something, and also because you wanted to eat meat. The priest got fixed portions of the animal for them, for their food, and for them to also distribute if they wanted to. Second, unlike the tithes, the foreleg, the jaw, and the maw have no sanctity, and therefore the priest who receives them may give them to a non-priest to consume. For these reasons, it is permitted to consume those parts of the animal that do not have to be given to a priest, even before one is given the parts that do have to be given so. So he was saying that even though the priest could have given me as a gift, I did not eat those. And if he didn't, so the Steinzel is saying it's permitted to consume these parts of the animal that do not have to be given to a priest, even before one has given the parts that do have to be given. So the point, though, being that had the priest set aside the gift, a non-priest would have been permitted to eat them, but he was very careful about that. So he was respectful about eating those gifts that should have gone to the priests. All right. Another example of Rabbi Parida's meticulous behavior is based on that which Rabbi Yitzchak said that Rabbi Yochanan said. So this is Rabbi Yochanan's teaching. Here's the proof of what he was, of the careful behavior of Rabbi Parida. Asur le'echol mibhema shelo hurmu matnoteha. It is prohibited to eat meat from an animal whose priestly portions have not been set aside. If the priestly portions were not set aside yet, then you shouldn't eat that meat. And V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol ha'ochel mibehema shelo hurmu matnoteha ki ilu ochel tvalim v'leit hilchata kvateh. Anyone who eats meat from an animal whose portions, priestly portions, have not been set aside is regarded as if he was eating untithed produce, and not a good thing to do. You're not allowed to eat untithed produce in the world of the rabbis. And so, therefore, you shouldn't do it. However, that's not the main that's not the main halacha. That's not the majority view. Nevertheless, Rabbi Parida was very strict and didn't eat from those portions. V'lo berachti lifnei chochein, and he never said the Birkat Hamazon. He never led it if there was a priest in who had eaten with him. He would give the honor to the priest. Lememra de me'aliyutahi, is this to say that he is doing something especially virtuous? Like, isn't that what you're supposed to do? And here's a teaching from Rabbi Yochanan. Kol talmid chacham shemevarech lefanav afilu kohen gadol am haaretz oto talmid chacham chayav mita. If any Torah scholar who allows someone else to bless Birkat Hamazon in his presence, even if that person is a high priest who is an ignoramus, then that Torah scholar is liable to receive the death penalty for belittling his own honor. Okay, so the idea here is, even though the priest has the higher privilege, in the rabbinic hierarchy of values, the Torah scholar comes first. If it's a high priest who's an ignoramus, a very knowledgeable high priest, doesn't mean anything in their hierarchy of values. It's Torah knowledge is first. So the fact that he's allowing any priest to have the privilege to lead when he's a scholar, is that really such a great thing? Because according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you were to allow a high priest or any priest who's not very knowledgeable, who's not a scholar, to lead over you, then you're belittling Torah honor, and you deserve the death penalty. Because here's the proof text: Kol misanai ahavu mavet. All those who hate me love death. Do not read it as those who hate me, rather those who make me hate it. So instead of misanai, read it as masniai. You change the vowels around, and it becomes a causative. So that's very important. The honor due the scholar. So the Gemara's response is ki ka'amar ihu b'shavin. So, well, of course, Rabbi Pareda was talking about this. He was speaking of people of equal stature. He was particular to honor the priesthood only when the priest was also a Torah scholar. Okay, so that's the solution. Sha'alu talmidav et Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. Now they ask another scholar, Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. What was the merit that what was your merit that you gained long life, that you merited? What did you do in life that merited you long life? B'meharachta yamim, amar lahem, miyamai, lo nitkabdati b'klon chaveri, v'lo alta al mitati kilalat chaveri, vatran b'mamoni hayiti. All right, so here are the three things. I never attained veneration at the expense of my fellow's degradation, right? I never used their degradation to lift myself up, nor did my fellow's curse ever go up with me upon my bed. That is, I didn't go to, but here it says fellow's curse. What they mean is, if I did anything where another person would want to curse me because I insulted them or angered them in some way, I never let it linger. I'd immediately correct the situation. And finally, I was always open-handed with my money, very generous. So now we go through these three merits. Lo nitkabdati biklon chaveri, ki ha de Rav Huna de Rei Mara akat fe. Now, so we're going to get a story, not about Rabbi Nechunya, but an example of what he's talking about. So the example is that they bring in is from Rav Huna. He was carrying a hoe over his shoulder as he returned from work. Rav Chana Bar Chanilai came, and out of respect for his teacher, Rav Chana was the student, took the hoe from him to carry it for him, so that Rav Huna, the teacher, shouldn't have to carry it. Rav Huna said to him, if you're accustomed to carry such objects in your own city, you may carry it. But if not, then for me to be venerated through your denigration is not pleasing to me. Right? So that carrying a hoe makes you look like you're being servile. And so he's saying, if what you do in life, you carry hoes, you help people out with that because you work the land like I do, then okay, I can accept your kindness. But if you're not a person who is used to carrying a hoe because maybe you don't work in the fields, then if you carry it for me, you're acting in a way that venerates me through your denigration, through the fact that you're carrying this utensil, which you don't usually do, which you're not used to, just to venerate me, and that's not acceptable. I don't want you to do that. So that's what he means. That's what Rav Nechunya ben Akana meant, that he would never attain veneration at my fellow's degradation. But notice how subtle this is. This isn't like stealing somebody's work, claiming credit for yourself, and so you're being venerated at the expense of somebody else. Oh no, that's not what he means. It's even just carrying a hoe, having, let somebody carrying your grocery bags, just to carry them when they're not, accustomed to that, used to that. They don't usually do it, and you're capable of carrying it. You don't want to venerate yourself over someone else's degradation, being forced to carry it. So that's a very, I think, respectful way. You don't like to treat even your students. You don't want them treated as serving you. Okay. Which, of course, in that world was not unusual. The student was expected to treat the teacher at an even higher level than one's own parents. Velo alta al mitati kilalat chaveri. Okay, I never allow the resentment caused by my fellow's curse, that is, my fellow was angry with me for some reason, to go up with me upon my bed. So here's an example of that coming from Mar Zutra. Not Rabbi Nechunya, but an example from Mar Zutra's life. When Mar Zutra would go to bed at night, he would first say, Sharei le lechol man ditza'aran. I forgive anyone who has vexed me, which is a beautiful way to do it. In fact, we say there's a passage that we say on Yom Kippur where we say something very similar to that. And in the prayer, what am I talking about? When the prayer before we go to bed, we say that we have that exact same sentiment, that anybody who's hurt me today, I forgive them. All right, and the last thing he was very generous. De Marmar, Eov vatran b'mamonei Hava. Job was open-handed with his money, was generous. And what the example of his generosity is, Shehaya maniach pruta lechen vani mimamonei. He would always leave at least a pruta with the shop owner after the transaction. Basically, as a way of saying, if there was a change, 35 cents or something like that, instead of taking it with you, just leave it with the owner. You didn't have to get every penny. A lot of times you buy something that's like $2.95, you give them $3. You don't have to take the 5 cents. You can leave it with the owner. At least that's what Rabbi Nechunya would do. All right, now here we go with another story with Rabbi Akiva asking Rabbi Nechunya the same question. What's curious is now Rabbi Nechunya is called Rabbi Nechunya Hagadol. Let's see if we have a personality. We don't have an explanation here. So we don't know why now it's Rabbi Nechunya Hagadol. So it's not clear whether this is the same Rabbi Nechunya or if this is Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, or if it's a different Rabbi Nechunya. And in any case, what's interesting is he gives different answers in the end of the story. Okay, so the Rabbi Akiva asked this question of Rabbi Nechunya Gadol: by what virtues were you blessed with longevity? So Rabbi Nechunya's attendants, see, here's these people who serve the scholars, came and started beating Rabbi Akiva. Who are you to ask Rabbi Nechunya about his merit? And also, at least according to Steinsaltz, he's intimating, hey, you're an old guy, which is very rude. So he ran away, he climbed up, and he sat on the top of a tree. Oh, hey Nate. Hopefully you can see the screen.
Yep, I can see it.
Great. So we're looking at these stories of what rabbis did to merit their long lives. So this is the second story about Rabbi Nechunya, Rabbi Akiva asking him, and the attendants of Rabbi Nechunya thought he was being a smart guy, so they chase him. He runs up a tree, and while he's up there, he calls out to Rabbi Nechunya, and he says, "My teacher, I have a question for you about the verse in the daily offering." This is that we read on Rosh Chodesh, Numbers 28, verse 4, and it says in the verse, keves echad. So he says, if it's stated lamb, keves, not kvasim, why does it also have to state one? Let's see what the note here says. It would appear that the question is relatively simple, yeah, because they're really, Rabbi Nechunya is really impressed with Rabbi Akiva's question. But so how did this prove to Rabbi Nechunya that Rabbi Akiva was a Torah scholar? So some note that in the Sifrei, which is a early midrashic text, there's an extended discussion with regard to the repeated appearances in the Torah of the mitzvah to bring the daily offering. So there's two times in the Torah where it describes the daily offering. And they explain that Rabbi Akiva demonstrated his scholarship by referring to that discussion. Others explain that Rabbi Akiva was hinting to his first question about the long life of Rabbi Nechunya. He knew that the meaning of one lamb was that only the unique animal in the flock is chosen to be used as an offering to God, which is going to be the answer Rabbi Nechunya gives. With this, he hinted that his original question was to be understood as follows: what unique virtue of Rabbi Nechunya was responsible for his longevity? So Rabbi Akiva was asking a very cleverly disguised question, and Rabbi Nechunya figured out what he was doing. So the question was, if it stated lamb in the singular, why does it have to say keves echad? You could just say keves. And upon hearing that, Rabbi Nechunya realized that Rabbi Akiva was a smart guy, a young Torah scholar, and he addressed his questions. With regard to the second question about the keves echad, he said the word one teaches that the lamb should be the unique one of its flock. Only the best quality lamb should be used for this daily offering. But then he realized, okay, then let me answer your first question, which is, what did I do to merit such a long life? And the answer is, in all my days, miyamai lo kibalti matanot, I didn't accept gifts, assumedly gifts for my rabbinic scholarship. I didn't take gifts from people because that can be very easily turned into bribes, and not, even if it's not a bribe, you kind of owe somebody who gives you a gift. How you gonna, tell them if they keep giving you gifts, when they bring you a chicken and they say, is it kosher, and it's not kosher, it's very hard to say to them, no, you can't use this chicken because they've been so nice to you. All right, so he didn't accept gifts. Velo amarati al midotai, I was ever inflexible, exacting a measure of retribution against those who wrong me. It's a weird way of translating it, but literally it's, I didn't stand on my qualities, or you could say I didn't stand on my, what do we say in English? We would say, I'm not standing on ceremony, meaning that if somebody treated me poorly, I wouldn't demand retribution if they had insulted me. Let's see, the halacha, is it the halacha here? One should not be merciless when it comes to forgiving an injustice that has been done to him. Okay. And then the last one was also, he was generous. So now we go through the qualities, and we note what was, again, examples of these. Again, not from his life. No, this is from his life. Sorry. Lo kibalti matanot ki had Rabbi Elazar. Right, this is Rabbi Nechunya. Sorry, it is not from his life. It's an example from another scholar, Rabbi Elazar. Ki havu mishadri li matanot mi beinesiya lo hava shakel. So this is that we're talking about in this example. Rabbi Elazar, when they would send gifts to him from the house of the Nasi, from the head of the community, he would not take them. And when he was invited to the house, he wouldn't go there, because that hospitality was also a gift. I remember Abe Marcus telling me that he followed his father-in-law, Abe Schulman's policy. He always pays for the lunch. When he goes out to lunch with a salesman, he's a businessman. Whenever he goes out to lunch with a salesman, he pays for lunch. He never lets them pay, because again, he doesn't want to feel that he is obligated to them in some way. So here, this is what Rabbi Elazar was doing too. Didn't want to feel obligated to the Nasi, and he would say to them, "It is not pleasing to you." Oh, well, he says, "Oh, it's not pleasing to you that I should live." Is that what you're saying? And because there's a line in Proverbs, so ne matanot yichya, the one who hates gifts will live. So he was being funny, you don't want me to live, I'm not going to take presents from you so I can live a long life. In contrast, though, so here's just the other side of the thinking about this. Rabbi Zera, when they would send him gifts from the house of the Nasi, that he wouldn't accept the gifts. But when they would invite him, he would go there. And why? Because he said, they are honored by my presence. Therefore, my visiting is not considered like I'm taking a gift from them. So that's a little bit of a different approach. Like, sometimes you have to accept invitations if you're a prominent individual, because not accepting is an insult. One thing to accept gifts and to say, or to not accept gifts. I'm not going to take a gift, because that's a little different. But when you invite me to your home and I say no thank you, that is even more insulting. Or I guess you could say, in the positive sense, you're inviting me because you recognize that I'm a significant person, and therefore it's valuable to you to have me, this significant individual, bestow my presence in your home. And so it would be rude not to go. So he made a distinction between gifts and visits. Okay, now here's the next one. Lo amarti al midotai. Didn't stand on principle, or not inflexible, exacting a measure of retribution against those who wrong me. That's how they're translated it. Here's the example from Rava. Kol hama'avir al midotai. That's the more common way of saying this. Kol hama'avir al midotav ma'avirin mimenu kol pisha'av. Whoever overlooks exacting a measure of retribution against those who wronged him, all his transgressions are removed from him. As it is stated, this is what we've been looking at in Morning Minyan, these verses from Micah about God's 13 qualities of mercy. God pardons iniquity and overlooks transgression, which is homiletically read, for whom does God pardon iniquity? The one who overlooks his transgressions. So in the verse, it's talking about God, but in the interpretation, God pardons the iniquity of the person who overlooks their transgressions that others have committed against him. Now, we saw this in Ta'anit, where the story between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, which is very interesting that this came up in the story about Rabbi Akiva, was the one asking the question, so maybe it shows how he learned this from Rabbi Nechunya. The story there was Rabbi Eliezer, there's a drought, and Rabbi Eliezer does all the things you're supposed to do in terms of prayer, and nothing happens, no rain comes. And then Rabbi Akiva recites the Avinu Malkeinu, and boom, the rain shows up. And people are like, what's going on? How come Rabbi Eliezer didn't get any rain? He's the great rabbi. And the answer that the Gemara suggested was, well, Rabbi Akiva was the type of person who ma'avir al midotav. He overlooked transgressions against him. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer was more of a hothead and would have a hard time doing that. So that's very valuable, that quality of overlooking the wrongs people do towards you. Okay, here's another rabbi. Sha'al Rabbi et Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha. Rabbi is, of course, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And he asked him, what did you do in your life to merit long life? And his answer to me was, he's kind of cute. Katzta bechayai, tired of me already? You're trying to get rid of me? And so of course he explains, no, I want to learn from you. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says, okay, so here are the three things. Miyamai, lo nistakalti bidmut adam rasha. That's the first one. In all my days, I never gazed at the likeness of a wicked person. And which seems kind of tough. I mean, what does it mean? You never looked at a wicked person? Well, Rabbi Joshua Kolb interpreted it this way, that he stayed away from wicked people and their influence. So it's not that he didn't look at them. It's a little more of an exaggeration. He did not associate with them and stayed away from that. So, and then following a teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, who actually is later than Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, but the teaching from Rabbi Yochanan is, it is prohibited for a person to gaze in the image of the likeness of a wicked man, as it is stated that the prophet Elisha said to Yehoram, the king of Israel, were it not that I regard the presence of Yehoshaphat, who's the king of Judea, I would not even look at you. So you have here an example of Elisha who says, I don't even want to look at people who are nasty. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan is teaching. Better not to look at, you want to stay so far away from wickedness, you don't even want to look at people who do wicked things. Well, the idea here is don't associate with them. That keeps you on the straight and narrow. And we say that every morning, right? We say at the morning, very early morning blessings, right before the Shema, we say, keep me from an evil neighbor, an evil fellow, evil person. Just, allow me to only associate with those who are decent. And that'll help me be a decent person. All right. And here we have another.
Wouldn't there be an issue as far as like kind of helping or counseling? Does that count? If you're not going to associate with wicked people, how are you supposed to help them at all? Or is this sort of we only study and that's not our job kind of thing?
That's really good, right? I think that would be a good response to say, wait a minute, if you're only going to hang out with people who you've deemed to be decent human beings, how are you going to make a change and an impact in the world? Your role as a good person, or as a rabbi, or as a Torah observant person, your goal is to influence other people. How can you do that if you're not going to be around them? So I think that's a good response. But clearly, here the teaching, the idea because it smacks a little bit of ivory tower life, right? It's very easy to be a pious person if all you do is sit in the Beit Midrash and study all day. It's a little tougher to be a decent person if you have to go out into the working world and deal with all types of people and all types of challenges to your ethics. That's the famous teaching in where is it? I think it's in Brachot. No, it's not Brachot. But it's what should a person study? It's Baba Metzia. What should a person study if they want to be a pious person? So answer number one, you should study Brachot because it's all about blessings, about prayer. Second one is you should study, what was the second one? The second one was you should study, I forgot the second one. But it was something to do with basically holy items, prayer or something like that. It'll come to me later. But the third rabbi says, you should study Nizikin, laws of torts, laws of damages. And clearly the message there is that, it's not so hard to be a holy person if you're going to study holy, if you're just going to be concerned with Tuma and Tahara, impurity and purity laws. If you're only going to study about prayer. If you're going to be a scholar in those areas, it's not so hard to be pious because you can follow those teachings. But when you get into the real world and you're studying business ethics and it's not so clear always what the pious response should be, that's the hard stuff. That's, if you want to be pious, you got to be really, really learned in those issues because that's tougher. So I think that's a really good critique on your part of this discussion. All right, so now we have a question about the Bible. Rabbi Elazar says, because we're talking about, here's an example of somebody who gazed at an evil person and lost their eyesight. Who is that? It's Father Yitzchak. Because we know that, remember, he lost his eyesight. That's why Jacob was able to trick him. Why did he lose his eyesight? It's because he looked at his son Esau. We know Esau is a wicked guy. Rabbis really don't like Esau. Then the Gemara questions, wait a minute. Hagaramalei? That's what caused his loss of eyesight? V'hamar Rabbi Yitzchak le'olam al tehi kilelat hedyot kala be'einecha. They have a different explanation. Because Rabbi Yitzchak taught a curse of an ordinary person should not be lightly regarded in your eyes. Don't take any, because somebody who you don't respect curses, don't think, that's meaningless. Who cares? You know what? You got to be careful with those curses too. Because look at this. Avimelech, who of course was a king, he cursed Sarah. That's the way that Gemara is interpreting what he told Sarah. Remember, Avimelech is told by Abraham that Sarah's his sister because Abraham this is the Ruth they've got going to save Abraham's life, so he shouldn't be killed and his wife stolen. They tell the kings of these areas that beautiful Sarah is his sister. And every time the ruler, first it's Pharaoh, then it's Avimelech, God shows up and says, don't you dare touch that lady. And, the king is always like, what? That was not fair. They played a trick on me. So when Avimelech says, okay, I'm not, thanks for letting me know, I'm not going to touch her, she can go back to Abraham, he tells Sarah regarding the gift that he's giving Abraham to, basically, please go away. Here's a gift for you. He refers to it in this unusual way. He says, behold, it is for you a covering of the eyes, which isn't so clear. Hinehu lach ksute naim. And the interpretation here in the Gemara is don't read covering of the eyes, but rather ksiat enaim, a blindness of the eyes. So basically, the way they're interpreting this, the conclusion of the story of Avimelech, Sarah, and Abraham, is that when Avimelech sends Sarah and Abraham away after he finds out that Sarah is the wife of Abraham, it's a curse that he says that this is a blindness of the eyes. This gift I'm giving you, these actual gift, these sheep and all these things, it's for a blindness of the eyes. And in fact, while she herself did not suffer, the curse was apparently fulfilled in the blindness of her son Isaac. So therefore, we have two explanations. One, the curse that Avimelech placed upon Sarah and her descendant, or hanging out with, or Isaac looking at his son, or not really so much looking, it's really being attracted to his son Esau over Jacob, and that caused him to lose his eyesight. The Gemara explains both this and that jointly caused it. It was both of them. And then Rava adds, the prohibition against gazing at the likeness of a wicked person is derived from this verse in Proverbs, Se'et pnei rasha lo tov. It is not good to raise the face, literally, to raise the face of the wicked, or to raise up the face of the wicked. Well, here, let's look at this note. This is it's prohibited to look at the image of a wicked person, or the likeness of a wicked person, because when one gazes at the likeness of another, one is drawn to him and begins to feel closer to him. Interesting. Therefore, only extended gazing and study of the image is prohibited, but not a casual glance. Okay, well, still, if you wanted to work with people and change who they are, you got to be with them for a while. Furthermore, some suggest that the phrase, the likeness of the image of the likeness, which appears repetitious, b'tselem demut, is intended to extend the prohibition to looking at even a picture of an evil person, and not just the person in flesh and blood. Okay, that's a little tough.
Is this supposed to be loosely associated to like idol worship, kind of?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, here it is the term there. Tselem. Tselem is the term that you would use for idols, but of course, we're also created in the B'Tselem Elokim. We're also created in the image of God. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's mostly a way. Well, maybe there is a drawing an analogy that you're looking at, to look at a wicked person, to look at an idol. They're both dangerous. Now, here's an interesting thing. At the end of Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha's life, he says to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says to him first, B'sha'at p'tirato amarle, Rabbi Barcheni, he says, please bless me. It's a very important thing before the great person dies, for them to bless the students or the children. But he gives them a really weird blessing. Yehi ratzon shetagia lechatzi yamai. May you live to half my life. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was like, Ulakul ha'ula? You're not blessing me that I should live your whole life? And he says something interesting. Now remember, the Yehuda Hanassi is he's the descendant of Hillel, who is the great, leader of the Jewish people at this time. He's that's why he's called Hanassi. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha's response to him is, Haba'im acharecha behema yir'u? Shall those who come after you just tend cattle? Now Steinsaltz explains this as, if you live as long as me, your sons will never be able to succeed you in the position of Nasi. I'm thinking of Queen Elizabeth. She's still queen. I don't know, she's like almost 100 or something. And Charles has been like wasting his whole life. I mean, he ruined Princess Diana's life. He's now, in a bad relationship with one of his sons. I mean, the guy's been sitting around doing nothing for his whole life. Whereas if Elizabeth had died at a decent old age, 80 something, maybe she'd been 80 years old or 75 even, Charles would have come into his own and be able to be a responsible leader. But now I was just reading something yesterday that some people think that when she dies, the monarchy dies because nobody likes Charles. So that's what I say. You've got to give your kids an opportunity who are coming after you. You're a great leader. You're recognized. It's going to be very easy for them to just coast in life. If you live a long time and are a leader for a long, long life like me, so my blessing to you is you shouldn't live that long so they can come in and take over and have their own, abilities to expand. It's interesting. It's kind of a tough blessing, but it is an interesting way of thinking about things. Now, this is really interesting too, I thought, because of Avu bar Ihi, Uminyamin bar Ihi. Okay, so they're brothers. They also responded to this idea of not looking at a wicked person. Now, here's what they said and how he translated it. Tete li de la istakali bagoy. Now that's one version. Another version has it bakuti. So one version or it was Arami. I forgot. It's in the there's two versions of this. This one that he's translated as, this might be the original. May a blessing come to me, for I never gazed at a Gentile. But notice that Steins also has put in wicked Gentile. He's trying to qualify it, because boy, that sounds really bad. If a blessing should come to me because I never looked at a goy. That sounds really horrible to our modern ears. So Steinsaltz throws in there a modifier. Oh, we're not talking about just any non-Jewish person. We're just talking about a wicked non-Jewish person. But that's not what the text says. And the other one says something also not so great. Tetili de lo avadi shutafut behade goy. I've never formed a partnership with a Gentile. Again, Steinsaltz adds in wicked. The idea is not associating with a wicked person. But you can imagine that in the world that they're living in, where there is a lot of discrimination against Jews, and Jews are treated very unfairly in most of their interactions with Gentiles, that they meant mamish, that they didn't want to, I should be blessed because I had nothing to do with those Gentile people who are always so mean to us. Nevertheless, and then I should say that the other version of the text is it's either Kuti or Arami. I think it was Kuti though, meaning that we're talking about a very specific group, and that was probably changed because in the medieval period, the Talmud was under a lot of scrutiny, especially by ex-Jews who would become fanatic Christians, and they would look for these passages that condemn Gentiles, and they would, burn the Talmud because of that. So sometimes there was self-censorship, and to say I never looked at this specific ancient people who don't exist anymore was safer than a standard Gentile.
The business one makes a little bit of sense only as a reference to, because if you conduct business with somebody who has, for example, a different Sabbath than you, than your employees who are not Jewish, you would essentially be having people work on this. You would be making people work on your Sabbath, even if it's not theirs. And that is also forbidden, isn't it? Like, that's why you don't call a cab. Not only do you not drive, but you don't call a cab either.
Right. So and also, of course, if you got into a fight with your partner who was not Jewish, and you went to the secular court or whatever, the native court, you were not probably going to get a fair deal. But I think what's really so interesting about this is I looked up these guys, Avu bar Ihi Uminyamin bar Ihi, and the text said nobody knows anything about them. So I just think it's so interesting that these two guys who said, may a blessing come to me because I had nothing to do with Gentiles, disappear from the history books. We just don't know anything else about them. So obviously they weren't so blessed.
Not when you don't talk to anybody.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so much of looking at blogs or other things from historians or history professors, they talk about how literature is very biased because it's an art
Right.
form.
Right.
And if you want a more accurate telling of history, it's like letters or diaries or somebody
Yes.
very uncensored, very personable look at something. It's not being interpreted for anybody. There's no, like you were talking about self-censorship. There's none of that.
Right.
So if they don't associate with anybody, or they're going to disappear because nobody's going to talk about them.
All right. So here we have. Here's another one. This is Rabbi Zera. Sha'alu talmidav shel et Rabbi Zera b'ma harachta yamim. Amar lahem miyamai lo hikparati betoch beiti v'lo tza'arati bifnei mi shegadol mimeni v'lo hirharti b'mevoot hamitunafot v'lo halachti arba amot b'lo Torah uv'lo tfilin v'lo yashanti b'veit hamidrash lo sheinat keva v'lo sheinat arai v'lo sasti b'takalat chaveri v'lo karati lechaveri b'chanichato ve'amri la b'chanichat b'chanich. Wait a minute. Wait, what's the difference? B'chanichato. B'hachinato. That's the difference. Okay. So this one is different. Notice this one breaks the pattern. All the other ones were 3, and this is different. So we got a lot of longer list here. First of all, in all my days, I was never angry inside my house with members of my household who acted against my wishes. Okay, that's he's adding here. But basically, I didn't get angry inside the house, which is very, very important. Because, of course, it's very easy to get angry with the people we're closest with, sometimes much easier than outsiders. Nor did I walk ahead of someone who was a greater Torah scholar than me. So he was very humble, always followed the greater scholars. Nor did I ever meditate upon the words of Torah in filthy alleyways, okay, place that's dirty. Words of Torah are healthy, are pure, and I would only think about them in pure places. Nor did I ever walk 4 cubits without meditating on words of Torah or without wearing phylacteries, tefillin. So first of all, here we see there was a time when people wore tefillin all the time. There were certain scholars, certain pious individuals who would constantly wear tefillin all day long. It wasn't just at morning services. But again, to do so properly, you have to be the proper frame of mind, which is hard for most of us, even for 45 minutes. But he was able to do it constantly. And also 4 cubits, that's like 6 feet. He wouldn't even go 6 feet without at least thinking Torah thoughts or thinking about his Torah studies. When he was in the study hall, he never slept, not even a nap, because I was always alert in the Torah and in the study hall. I never rejoiced when my fellow stumbled, nor did I ever call my fellow by a derogatory nickname or by his nickname. So he makes a difference between hanichato or hachinato. Let's see, the intention is to a nickname that, although it is somewhat derogatory, one has come to terms with it and doesn't mind being referred to by it. Some explain that the root of the word kuf, it's not kuf, it's kaf, nun, no, chet, nun, kaf, similar to the word kinui, which means nickname, although it would appear that the root chanach means to educate, chinuch is education. If that is the case, it's hard to understand what the connection is with its meaning here. Okay, so it's a little unclear exactly what that last one is. But let's see what, and that's the end. So there we don't have any more description of that. That's just Rabbi Zera's list of his virtues that allowed him to be blessed with a long life. Okay. New Mishnah. Va'oda ma Rabbi Yehuda. Beit HaKnesset shecharav ein maspidim bitocho ve'ein mafshilim betocho chavalim, ve'ein porsin letocho mitzudot, ve'ein shotchin al gago peirot, ve'ein osin oto kapandaria. So this is interesting. This is the opposite of the Kaplan, Mordechai Kaplan's idea of what a modern 20th century shul should be, which was the shul with the pool and the school. He's saying a synagogue really shouldn't be used for any secular purposes. So here's his example. He said, first of all, a synagogue that fell into ruin still may not, you still can't use for mundane purposes. You can't eulogize in it. It's not appropriate to turn a synagogue into a funeral home. You can't stretch out and repair ropes in it because, you might have a lot of space, and to repairing ropes, the ropes are really long. You can pull it the length of the sanctuary, but you shouldn't do it in the synagogue. You shouldn't spread animal traps with it. It's certainly not, if it's a ruined synagogue, it might be tempting because maybe animals would start living in the area of the synagogue, but you shouldn't spread traps in there. Nor should you spread produce out on its roof to dry it, nor make it a shortcut. Meaning that, using it, like cut through the synagogue to shorten your time. The halacha then it continues. Shene'emar v'hashimoti et mikdashechem kedushatan av kashehein shoamin. The verse in Leviticus says, these are in the curses, I will bring desolation to your sanctuaries, to your holy space. The word holy space is after the word desolation. So even after the synagogue has been desolated, it's still sacred. It's still a mikdash, holy. Alubo asavim lo yitlosh. If in this ruined synagogue, grass is growing up through the floor, you should not pick it up. You shouldn't mow it or get rid of it. Mipnei agmat nefesh. Agmat nefesh is sadness, something that causes sadness. You should look at this synagogue and how it's fallen into disrepair and let it continue to be in disrepair because it should make us feel bad. And, well, either one of two things. Steinsaltz suggests either that you should feel sorry, oh my goodness, look what we allowed this to happen to the synagogue, and also encourage people to rebuild it. If they feel bad about it, then they'll want to repair it. Okay, so now we get to the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan, but taking this.
Excuse me 1 second. Yeah. Sorry about that. A couple of months ago, there was a fire at the Chabad down in Louisville, and a guy I know is the rabbi there, or a rabbi there. I'm sure there's plenty of them. But he had a whole thing like the next day. He was leading services like outside of it. He had put up pictures and stuff where he had led like a class or something and had like minyan outside of it, even though it had practically burned down. They're still fixing it though.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that's right. So that's the idea, is that you see the condition and you feel bad and you say, we got to rebuild this holy place. Okay, so the Gemara responds, Tanu Rabbanan batei knesiot ein nohagin behen kalut rosh. So here's another lesson about how to behave in synagogues. Batei knesiot ein nohagin behen. I said that. One may not act inside with frivolity, kalut rosh, lightness of head, literally, in a frivolous way. Ein ochlin behen. You don't eat in them. You don't drink in them. One does not adorn oneself in them, which the note says, Rashi and many others understand this word is derived from the word noi, neotin, meaning beauty. Therefore, they explain that the prohibition is to adorn oneself in the synagogue. The Meiri assumes the word is derived from naveh, meaning an abode, and therefore explains there's a prohibition to use a synagogue as one's dwelling place. Rashi suggests in tractate that the word is derived from hana'ah, meaning pleasure or benefit, and therefore there is a prohibition to use the synagogue for one's private affairs. Okay, so again, this is a little different than the way we see our synagogues today, but at this time it's exclusively for sacred purposes, worship or study. Inside them, you don't wander around, nor may one enter them in the sun for protection of the sun or rain, to shelter from the rain. So a synagogue shouldn't be used as a shelter. Nor does one offer a eulogy inside them for an individual, which is a private event. However, one may read the Bible, may read scripture inside them. One may study halachot inside them. And one may offer a eulogy inside them for a Torah scholar if the public attends the eulogy, because that's different. Again, Torah scholar equals Torah. Okay, so then we get Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ematai b'yishuvan, aval b'chorbanan manichin otan ve'olin behen asavim, ve'lo yitlosh mipnei admat nefesh. So Rabbi Yehuda says, well, when is these restrictions apply? That's when the synagogue is in functioning, but when they are in a state of ruin, they should be left alone so that the grass will sprout up inside them. That's related to the Mishnah, and you don't pick the grass because of agmat nefesh, because you want people to see the terrible condition and feel bad about it and make a change. Okay. Asavim, man dechar shamayhu. So grass. Who mentioned anything about with the halacha? See, that's related to the Mishnah, but this one halacha didn't say anything about grass. Right. Okay. So he said, who brought up grass? And the Gemara explains the text of the Baraita, in fact, is incomplete, and its teaching is teaching the following. Among the other things that may be done in synagogues, they should also be sure to sweep them and to sprinkle their floors with water in order that grass not sprout up in them. Although it seems to me if you sprinkle the floors with water, they would spray up. But okay. The idea is, I guess, you want to sweep. So he's saying you want to sweep the grass. You want to clean the floors. You want to make sure that the floors are clean. And when does that apply? Oh, that's when they're occupied. So you should have somebody cleaning the floors, making the place look nice when they're functional. It's only when they're in a state of ruin. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Then you let the grass sprout up to encourage people to rebuild the place and fix it up. Amar Rav Asi, but taking nesiot shebevavel al tanai hein asuyin. Synagogues in Babylonia are built from the outset with a stipulation that they not have the full sanctity of a synagogue, in order that it be permitted to use them for the community's general needs. So basically what he's saying is they're made with a stipulation that they can be used for other purposes. And maybe this is the idea where we came up with, it is the Palestinian approach, which said synagogues are sacred spaces. We don't play around in them. No levity, no using it like for secular purposes. But Babylonian, they had a different attitude, and they said, no, we build it with the understanding that we're going to use it for community needs. Nevertheless, ein nohagin behen kalut rosh. You shouldn't act inside with frivolity. So the question, well, what does that mean? Now that's interesting. They say no calculations, no business calculations. So frivolity here is not like telling jokes. It's using the synagogue, coming into the synagogue and doing your business there, business deals or all those kind of business calculations, accountings for your business inside the synagogue. That's not appropriate. Amar Rav Asi.
Does it have to do like the Palestinian attitude because of its relation, but how close it would be to Jerusalem, but and
Oh yeah, yeah. That.
that now it has to be used for holy purpose.
Yes, absolutely. That could be part of the difference. Is that the Babylonians are living in exile. They're not in the Holy Land, and so therefore they feel that there's a lesser sanctity to the land that they're on. Just the areas, the Mikdash Me'at, the synagogues that they're praying in, that has a level of holiness, but but Babylonia doesn't. Whereas, yeah, it would be, yeah, that would be a very good, interesting discussion on the difference between Babylonian and Palestinian understandings of where they live and how that impacts. Because if you're living in exile, your attitude towards the community you're living in, the land you're living on, is going to be different than if you're living in the land of Israel, which the land itself is holy. Okay, so we're talking here. So the business calculations, and Rav Asi said, "Beit HaKnesset shemechashvin bo cheshbonot, malinin bo et hamet." If if that's how you're going to treat your synagogue, where you're going to be doing business calculations in them, eventually, you know what? The place is going to turn into a funeral home. They're going to be dead bodies. It's going to be, and of course, if a sacred space is about life, your place is going to be turned on its head, and it's going to be a place where dead people are. And then, so the Gemara says, wait a minute, really? It's going to be a place for dead people, and there's no other alternative. And Rav Asi says, or the understanding of Rav Asi's teaching is that as a punishment for acting with frivolity, or turning it into a very secular place with doing your business calculations there, that people in the community will die, and including people who have no family, and so ultimately they will have to keep a corpse with no one to bury it. That's the mate mitzvah overnight in the synagogue. So it'll be turned into this place where the dead who need the community to take care of them will end up, because you've already desanctified, in a sense, the place by doing your business there. Okay, now we get to the
surprised they don't bring up like having dead bodies around and the restriction for Kohanim. Like, if you're gonna have dead bodies around, then the priest can't come there and it messes everything up.
Right. Here's the next one. Ein neotin bahen. You're not supposed to adorn yourself inside it. Amar Rava, hachamim v'talmidim mutarin. Scholars and rabbinic scholars and wise people. How do they translate it? Torah scholars and their disciples. Okay, they're permitted to adorn themselves in there, to fix themselves up. Demar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, my Bei Rabbanan, Beita de Rabbanan. So he's calling the Beit HaKnesset a Bei Rabbanan, which is a Beit, house of the rabbis, house of the scholars. So he's saying, yeah, all right, but because Torah scholars would be there all the time. That's their usual place. So if they need to, I'm not really sure what adorn oneself in this case means. You get dressed?
I assume put on something that's fancier, more than just your normal.
Yeah, I don't. Right,
because you're going to go there and put on talit or tefillin or something, but maybe not doing makeup or perfume as far as women goes, but or you can't use it as a bathing place or anything else. I suppose.
Well, we've learned that you're not supposed to be naked in the synagogue. You're not supposed to bathe in there, even in a synagogue that's no longer used as a synagogue. But the other possibilities that Steinsaltz gave us was the Meiri said it could be like a dwelling place, so that scholars, maybe that's, if we understand it that way, maybe scholars are permitted to live there, or have a place to sleep in there because they're there all the time. I don't know. It's not really clear what adorn means in that case. ואין נכנסין בהן בחמה מפני החמה ובגשמים מפני הגשמים. Can't use it as a shelter. Now we get the story of Ravina and Rav Ada Bar Matan on how they did it, because they were standing and asking questions of Rava when a shower of rain began to fall upon them, and so they ran into the synagogue, saying, which of course we just were told you're not allowed to do that, but they said our having entered the synagogue is not due to the rain. Rather, it is due to the fact that the halakha we were discussing requires clarity like the day of the north wind. Basically, instead of saying, we're not getting in here because we're trying to get shelter from the rain, we're getting in here because we can't study Torah properly if we're getting rained on or the wind is blowing around us and we can't focus. So it's interesting to see that, again, this hierarchy of values. Yeah, you can't use a synagogue as for a secular functional purpose, even to protect yourself from the rain or sun. But if you're studying Torah, it's crazy to try to make yourself miserable and try to focus when you're getting rained on or it's 95 degrees in the sun. You can't focus. So then it's okay to come into the synagogue, and so you can focus. Okay, here's another story. Rav Amar le Rav Acha Barei the Rava le Rav Ashi. Itztarich le leinish lemikre gavra mi be knisa mai. Oh, he's asking a question. If a person needs to, if somebody's in shul and you need to get him, well, you're not allowed to enter a synagogue for no purpose. So what do? How do you reach the guy? If I can't just go in there, I don't need to daven. I davened somewhere else. Now I need to go reach somebody. What am I supposed to do? So Rav Ashi gives some suggestions. Well, if you're a Torah scholar, young Torah scholar, you could recite a halakha while you're entering the synagogue. Or if it's a Tana who memorizes Mishnayot, you could recite a Mishnah. Or you're a Bible person, you can recite a verse. Or you could go into the synagogue and ask one of the kids who are studying, tell me what you learned today, recite for me the verse. Or if you don't have any of those things to do, off the tip of your tongue, you could just go into the synagogue and, for a short time, meditate there for a moment, and then stand up and leave. Of course, this is the opposite of the famous joke, where a synagogue that has tickets for high holidays, and the guy says, I need to go see Mr. Feinberg. And the guy at the door says, do you have a ticket? And he says, no, I don't have a ticket. I'm not coming here to worship. I just need to pass a message to Mr. Feinberg. He goes, no, you can't get in here without a ticket. And he goes, I just want to talk to Feinberg. I just need to get him a message. It's no big deal. I'll be out in 5 minutes. So the guard finally says to him, okay, but if I catch you praying, so that's the opposite of what we just saw. Umaspidim behens hesped shel rabim. Okay, so you can offer a eulogy for for a Torah scholar if there's, again, assuming there's people, public are coming out to honor the Torah scholar, then you can use the synagogue to eulogize. So what are the examples? What's the circumstances? So Rav Chisda offered, this is a very nice story about Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshet's humility. So Rav Chisda said, for example, a eulogy for a scholar where Rav Sheshet is present. So if Rav Sheshet, the great Rav Sheshet, came to the funeral, that he would only be there because of the importance of this Torah scholar, and people are going to be in the present, and so therefore that's an example. That's a public eulogy and a public funeral. And then Rav Sheshet said the same thing regarding him. He said, for example, if there was a eulogy at Rav Chisda was present, the great scholar Rav Chisda, and people showed up, and Rav Chisda was there, obviously the person who died was prominent, and that's that would be an example of an acceptable eulogy in a synagogue. So they were both complimenting each other. Here's another example. Rav Ram once eulogized his daughter-in-law inside a synagogue. He said, due to my honor and the honor of the deceased, everyone will come to the eulogy. So therefore, it is a public event. And another example, Rabbi Zera once eulogized a certain sage inside a synagogue. And he said, whether due to my honor or the honor of the deceased, people will come. So you see here that there's different examples. When we're talking about, again, the hierarchy of values, Torah scholars equal Torah. So if a Torah scholar is going to be at the funeral, we're making an assumption that this person was a significant, learned person that the great Torah scholar is honoring. That is going to be a situation where people will show up. Or if a relative of the scholar passed away and the scholar is eulogizing, that's another example of what a public eulogy and a public funeral is, where the scholar, people are coming to console the scholar, and in his honor, you're doing a public event. And Rabbi Zera adds, or it might be the honor of the person who died. And so therefore, for all of these reasons, people are going to come, the public is going to come and honor either the scholar who's visiting, the scholar who's eulogizing, or the person who passed away. And all of these are public funerals, and therefore they're public eulogies. Now we have an example of Reish Lakish, who's a little to show his compassion. He once eulogized a certain young Torah scholar who was frequently present in Eretz Yisrael, and because Reish Lakish was a Palestinian scholar, and who used to study halakha in the 24th row. Now, in these ancient study halls, the closer you were to the front, to where the teacher was, the order of scholarship. So 24th row, you're a pretty new scholar, you're a backbencher. Nevertheless, because he was studying Torah or halakha, Reish Lakish did eulogize this young scholar. And not only that, but he said, Vai chasra ar'ad Yisrael gavra rabba. We've lost a great man. So he recognized, even though this person, other people might have said, oh, well, he was just, a young scholar. He didn't really hadn't learned that much. And didn't even show up all the time. He was in the back rows. Nevertheless, Reish Lakish eulogized him as a great man. In contrast, now we have a contrast with Rav Nachman, who's a Babylonian scholar. There was a guy who studied halakha, Sifra and Sifrei, and Tosefta. Sifra and Sifrei are the midrashic collections of halakha, very, very early midrashic collections. Tosefta is that parallel text to the Mishnah. So this is a person who's pretty learned, pretty good scholar, and he died, and people came and said to Rav Nachman, let the master eulogize him. And he said, what am I supposed to say? He was a basket filled with books, very dismissive. It wouldn't be true to say he was a great scholar, because he wasn't a great scholar. He knew some books, he knew some stuff, but he wasn't a great scholar. It's not appropriate for me to eulogize him as a great man, right? So compare Rav Nachman to Reish Lakish. Ha-chazi ma bein takifei de ar'a de Yisrael lechasidi de Bavel. Look at the difference between the hard guys in Eretz Yisrael and the pious ones, the saintly ones of Bavel, right? The hard guys in Eretz Yisrael were more compassionate than the saintly ones of Babylonia. And you have to assume this is another part of a lot of times we see things in the Talmud that are clearly polemical battles between the Israeli scholars and the Babylonian scholars. And you got to believe that this is Land of Israel guy, an Eretz Israeli scholar, bringing this midrash to show the difference between Reish Lakish and Rav Nachman and the type of scholarship that existed in Eretz Israel and in Babylonia. Tanan Hatam, we learned in Avot, in a Mishnah, and it says there, one who makes use of the crown of Torah learning will perish from the world. And Reish Lakish taught, this is referring to one who allows himself to be served by one who studies halachot, which is the crown of Torah. And then, so that you shouldn't abuse somebody's scholarship and take advantage of them if they are learning halacha and Torah. Now, then we have this statement down here. Ula said it is better that a person should be served by one who studies 4 orders of the Mishnah, and he should not allow himself to be served by one who teaches 4 orders of the Mishnah, as in that case with Reish Lakish. That is, if somebody's going to serve you, help you out, take care of you, they're a student and they're learning the 4 orders of the Mishnah, better that than have somebody who's a teacher, who's so scholarly that they're teaching. That you shouldn't do. And Rabbi Joshua Kulp explains, what does it mean, the 4 orders of the Mishnah? Because there's 6 orders of the Mishnah. And he says by the Amoraic period, 2 orders of the original 6 were not being learned. In Israel, they learned Zra'im, Moed, Nashim, and Nizikin. That's the first 4 orders. Agricultural law, festival law, laws about relationship between men and women, and torts. And in Babylonia, they didn't teach Zra'im, which there was no need for agricultural law, but they taught the other 3, and they also taught Kodashim, which are holy things. They were sensitive to issues of what are the sacred utensils that were used in the temple. So this, and then the story that we're going to read here about Reish Lakish explains what we just learned. He was traveling along the road and he reached a deep puddle of water. A certain man came and placed him upon his shoulders and began transferring him to the other side. Reish Lakish said to him, have you read the Bible? You've read scripture? And he says, yes. Have you studied Mishnah? He says, yes. He said to him, you know what? Throw me into the water because I should not be taking advantage of you. You're learned. So throw me into the water. And the man says to Reish Lakish, you know what? I'm very happy to serve you because you're a great Torah scholar, greater than me. And so I'm willing to, I want to serve you. And he says, okay, then learn from me this matter. And he teaches this little halacha about Jewish women being very strict upon themselves, so strict that even if they see a spot of menstrual blood that is the size of a mustard seed, they still wait 7 days before immersing themselves in a mikvah. Okay. And the reason he did that is because now you're a disciple of mine. Because now it's acceptable for you to serve me because that was the relationship people had of master to disciple. And then the last piece here is then we have a follow-up, the school of Eliyahu, Tana Debe Eliyahu. Anyone who studies halachot every day, halacha, is guaranteed that he is destined for the world to come. Because don't read God's ways are eternal, halichot olam, rather read halachot olam, right? Don't read halichot, ways, but rather halachot olam. If you study halachot, halacha, you will be promised eternal life. Okay, that is the end of 28. We're going to pick up 29 we'll pick up 29 next week, next Sunday, and we're getting close. 2 more sessions and we'll be done. So I'll send out the notes for 29. Starting this week. and we'll finish that up. Okay, and I'll make
Sounds
sure.
good.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Have a good week.
Oh, you too.
All right. Take care.
Good seeing you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.